So yes, I'm excited, but very nervous because it is a big decision.
I'm for voting. Let's vote, guys.
We are young and there's no job for youth.
The ANC will lose its majority.
We have had enough.
This is the day when South Africa decides on the future of our country.
You know, in life we must have hope. That's why I'm here. I believe things will change.
And that is a common sight across most of South Africa today. Why? Well, because South Africans are going to the polls. They are electing provincial legislatures and also the national parliament. And it is particularly the election to the national parliament that we're going to be focusing on today on News Desk, which, as you know, is a DW News conversation that brings in your questions, comments and observations that you post in the chat. We take them and we post them to our experts. I'm Biresh Banerjee.
And I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting, and I'll be focusing on those comments, on those questions, putting them to our very special guests who are coming up shortly. And a big hello to everyone who's joining us on the stream. Some of you with very strong political views there, I can see.
So today is election day, so we can expect political views, but it's not an ordinary election. It's an election that could literally redefine South Africa. And the reason we are saying that, not just us, but everybody in South Africa is apparently saying that, is because it is the first time in 30 years that the ruling ANC, that's the African National Congress, could potentially lose its majority. The first time since 1994, when the first free and fair democratic elections were held in South Africa after the end of apartheid, that the ANC could actually lose its majority. And that could have severe consequences or far-reaching consequences for South Africans. We are talking about coalition politics. We are talking about soul-searching potentially within the ANC as to where things went wrong, what the next steps are. And we are also potentially looking at uncharted territory where we have a situation where maybe coalitions aren't formed in time. So a really consequential election which will have a major impact on South Africans.
Yeah, and as we've said, we're looking forward to your comments and to your questions, and thanks to people who've already commented on this and also on our community post that we had put up. And I've got some comments already. User Fish and Hunt says, well, the ANC has run the country almost into the ground, so a change is warranted. The question is, are there any viable alternatives? Andy Cochran 121 says, the ANC turned South Africa from a nation developing its own nuclear power into a nation that can't keep the lights on. They have completely and utterly failed the country and have sowed division, racial hatred and violence. But Auntie 134 says, for the first time, the ruling party ANC is facing stiff competition, hoping either the ANC or the EFF, who we'll come to later, can win. A majority of the opposition parties are there just to split the votes, and they don't have any meaningful manifestos. So thank you for those comments so far, and do please keep them coming. And I think also now is a good time to introduce you to the rest of this table. Obviously, it's Biresh, it's me, Alex, and to my right we have Christine Mundwa, who has spent most of your life in South Africa, living there, growing up there, working there, and you've just come back from there where you've been reporting on this election. So it's great to have you, to have your expertise. Thank you very much. We have Dustin Hammerline, who is, I want to call an old hand on News Desk, but you're not old, are you, Dustin? That would be, that would be cruel.
I do sometimes feel old, but like...
we don't think of you as old.
You're not as old as we are.
Probably, I don't want to be thought of as
experienced?
old. Like, thank you.
Experience is not the same as old.
An experienced hand.
I'll go with
Experienced, seasoned hand. I'm old, you're experienced. Let's go with that.
Okay. Anyway, you will be sort of bringing us up to date and spelling out for us how important these elections are. So thank you for being with us. And we have Cherry Chan, who's opposite me. She is with you in the chat, and she will be telling you who's coming up next and putting in some links and some, if we have graphs, anything that's important, you'll put in there.
So you can ask for anything. I will try to cater to
almost anything. Maybe not anything.
Yeah. Almost. Anything related to the chat today.
And the person that we can't see is Wade Adams. He is in our control room with our tech team. Very important. We wouldn't be able to be streaming now if they weren't there. So a big thank you and welcome to them.
And soon we'll also be having another expert joining us. We'll be having William Gumede, who is a political analyst, who will be joining us from Johannesburg for some wider context to do with these elections. And we're looking forward to sort of hearing from him.
Yeah, and as well as your comments and your questions that you're hopefully going to be putting in, thank you very much to those who are. Hello to Archie. Hello to Africa is King. Welcome. We have also got a poll for you that we thought would be a good way to kick this all off. And Cherry has the details of that and what the question is and what the options are.
All right, poll question today. Is the ANC's political dominance over in South Africa? Yes or no? Remember to vote, and you can find the poll on top of your live chat.
Great.
So we're curious to see what you will say to that. But let's just get started with the discussions today. And this is my cue to sort of go over to Dustin, who can help us answer in a preliminary fashion, the question why this election is a landmark election.
Yeah, let me answer that. And also, I think it's important to really go back to the basics here. If you look at the ANC's past, it's really been dominating the political landscape of South Africa. It's been the majority party since the end of apartheid. And that might come to an end. And that's really where the big break might happen, depending on how people cast their votes today. By the way, results will only be in on Saturday, so there is some time until we will know if that's actually going to happen or not. But already now, if you look at the polling, you can see that they are not doing as well as they did in past elections. And that's mostly due to a lot of problems that they have, that their long political, long time in the government has left the country with. This includes, for example, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. This includes load shedding, which is a major issue. The electrical grid in South Africa is far from reliable, and if you want to run a business there, it's always you can't rely on electricity always being available. This includes economic struggles, we have seen a big rise in unemployment in recent years in South Africa, and also general economic struggles. The country is not doing well economically, even though it's been on the rise since the pandemic. There was a big South Africa was in big trouble during the pandemic. It's back to pre-pandemic levels now, but still, over this long period, people were expecting the ANC to deliver way more, to deliver a path out of these economic struggles into a bright future. And that hasn't really happened over this long time in government. And that's why now you have lots of opposition parties rising up and opposition politicians demanding change and demanding new president, or at least a coalition. And that's really unprecedented. The ANC had never had to build a coalition before. And that's what we will talk about today. I think one other thing that's pretty important to think about is that the ANC's legacy is really connected to the struggle against apartheid. But now a lot of young voters haven't lived through the area of apartheid. It's long ago now. So these people don't have the same connection to the ANC's struggle against apartheid, and don't have the same, they don't remember these times of struggle in the same way, and that makes them more unlikely to vote for the ANC.
Let's just, since you have talked about the young voters, I want to come to you, Christine. But just before we do that, Wade, if you're hearing me, I do believe that we have a collection of sound bites from young voters in South Africa, and them expressing their hopes and dreams and what they expect, particularly from this election. Let's just try and listen to what they had to say, and then pick up on what they say, and then we can talk a bit more about young voters. Is that all right? So Wade, whenever you have the clips, it'll be good to sort of play it.
People are just trying to figure out who to vote for, and we don't know. We don't know who to put our trust in, because we think if it's not the big three, then who else?
I always wanted to vote for ANC because I've seen how it's been helping people, and I can see that many people love it, so why not must I come and support it?
AFF have given me something that ANC have never given me. I'm 35 and nobody's gonna hire me, But with EFF, I have hope.
Us as the youth, we should unite together and try to see a better tomorrow with MK and support our political parties and make sure that as the youth, we all vote.
South Africa is beautiful and there's more that can be done to South Africa. And I believe us as the youth coming up, we have so much brilliant ideas to change our country.
They have so many brilliant ideas, Christine. What is the impression you drew when you were in South Africa recently? In fact, you hosted DW News Africa that I'd recommend some of our viewers to check out on YouTube. It's there on YouTube. An extended version of DW News Africa. But what were young people telling you when you were there? Could you add to what we just heard?
Yeah, I mean, so unemployment is a huge theme, right? So 1 in 3 South Africans of working age are not employed, right? That just gives you a sense of it. And then if you break those numbers down and you specifically look at young people, that's about 45% of people who are unemployed, right? So that is a big thing for people. Getting out of school, and what do? You've got people my age, right? And I have to say here, I'm 33, who've never had a job, a steady job. These are the conditions that people are facing. So that's a really big thing for young people, that you just, all this wasted potential, right? Because maybe they can't even access university. And in some cases as well, we've got the graduate numbers where about 10% of graduates are unemployed, right? So it's a really difficult thing. So the lack of opportunities. And then when somebody's unemployed, it just means that your living conditions are, substandard. And we're talking about a segment of the population, mostly Black South Africans, whose parents are not super well off, right, because of, the history of the country. So, somebody's probably coming from a home where their parents were a domestic worker. They live in, sort of maybe an informal settlement, something to that effect. So that is a really big problem in the country right now. And often when you speak to young people in this position, they've almost lost hope, in a sense, right? They feel, what's it going to change anyway, right? We hear all these promises, but nothing ever materializes. And what you also need to understand is things are getting gradually worse, right? The economic conditions are worsening. So there are more layoffs, right? The economy is growing more sluggishly. You've had your... You
can have a look at what you're talking about. We have some pictures of what that basically implies, but please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, look at that, right? This is where people live. Corrugated iron shacks. Government, I mean, there's no sanitation, right? Government doesn't come around and clean up this mess. Look at that. People having to live in these conditions. You have school children, right, crossing rivers to get to school, getting there on an empty stomach, right? Because in some cases, the government will say, OK, there is a school, but the kids are coming from homes where there is no food. So you're teaching hungry children, right? And government programs that have been meant to improve the lives of people, build people decent housing, they're not catching up to that. They've got a huge backlog. So these are the conditions many people live in. And if you go and knock on those doors and say to people, are you registered to vote? Don't be surprised when you meet, just sort of apathy, people disinterested and not getting the sense that this is actually a useful exercise altogether.
And I do want to talk about that voter apathy. I mean, I think we have statistics. Dustin, maybe you have access to that from the Election Commission, the Independent Election Commission of South Africa, in which they show some voter registration statistics. And it'll be good to just sort of draw that up for our viewers. Because those statistics do talk about the voter apathy that you're talking about there, Christine. I think those are the ones I'm talking about. So right at the top is the 18 to 19 figures. And that's one of the lowest voter registrations that you see. And that's just in the 18 to 19 group. And correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, but in the 20 to 29 group, there's only about 4.4 million out of a prospective 11 million who have registered to vote. And I'm just wondering, all this is not working. Why do young people think that they will be able to change their situation by not voting? Isn't it counterintuitive?
Let me just say one thing. We can share that link in the chat if you guys want to have a look.
Absolutely. Break it down. So like I'm saying, we really need to understand some of the conditions that people are living in, right? You live in a part of the country where government doesn't function, right? There is no refuse collection, there's no sanitation. You live in a corrugated iron shack. You are hustling just to get by to the next day, right? the chances that somebody is even in possession of an identity document, the chances that, you know, the media about the election and the know-how. I mean, I've got friends and people that I know who are doing, you know, the legwork for some of the political parties to go and get people. These people are so out of the system, out of reach of the system. They don't even know that an election is happening. So in as much as you're hearing young people saying, oh, this is our opportunity, there are some people who woke up today and it was an ordinary day where they needed to figure out where the next meal is coming from. So you have a big segment of the population living in these conditions. And remember, we're talking about Africa, right? And like Africa, South Africa is a young country. So many of the people who find themselves in this position, these are young people who don't even understand the power that they have. Right? We're talking about 20-odd million South Africans who just don't engage in the voting exercise ever. If these people were to be brought into the system, we could really see that country change. But they don't even possess that knowledge and the understanding of just how powerful it would be if they all rise up and do something.
Can I just
quickly bring in William, because he's on the line, and then we can take in some questions and comments from people. As we promised earlier, William Gumede is a political analyst who's joining us from Johannesburg. Good to see you, William. Just a bit more about William. He's not just a political analyst, he's also a lecturer at Wits University and founder of the non-profit Democracy Works Foundation. So glad you could make the time on election day, William, to join us. We're looking forward to talking to you. But before we come to you, Alex has a few comments and observations coming in the chat, and maybe we can get you to react to them once she's read them out.
Yes, and just picking up on what you were discussing about the youth vote, we have Ari Bavel, who says, in the last national election, the talk on the street was don't vote if you're dissatisfied with ANC governance. You showed clips of people telling the youth to vote. Is this a seismic shift? Is the question.
So I think that was interesting because there was, you know, don't vote for ANC. I'm familiar with that, right? Because to say we need to somehow signal to the party that we're not happy. So you've had that, you know, where people who are lifelong ANC card-carrying members saying, right, we need to signal to the party that we're not happy. We don't have other political homes, so we're going to stay away, right? And that, in a sense, is expressing how we feel about that. What I'm talking about is something different altogether in terms of the people who are not even aware of that, and for reasons particular to him. But yes, there has been, you know, sort of for particularly Black South Africans who feel that, you know, the ANC is their home, that this is the party that brought about the democracy. And remember, a lot of these young people are coming from homes where their parents say, look, the ANC liberated this country, so we owe something to this party. But then there's this conflict where young people say, but we appreciate that, but surely now they've got to also deliver, right?
I'd like to bring in William on this. William, just on this point, and I'm assuming that you're being able to hear us and see us quite clearly and hear what Christine was saying there. Is the ANC falling out of favour with young people? A, and B, are young people generally so disinterested in politics that they will not even vote to try and change their lot?
No, thank you for having me with you. I'm very excited to speak to you. Just to say, I mean, if you just look at the ANC's election campaign, I mean, the ANC did not even target young people at all. They didn't even bother, they didn't even try. Because they understand that young people are not going to vote for them. I mean, the ANC's election campaign that started very, very early last year, already September, which is also unprecedented in South Africa electoral history to start our campaign so early. So the ANC has just been focusing on older voters, you know, those on social grants, those in the rural areas. So, I mean, I have not focused on young people. But I mean, just on that, if I unpack some of just on the numbers, young people, I mean, the last election, general election 2019, 9 million people, mostly youths, had registered, but they did not vote. And another 14 million, also mostly youth, did not even register. So if and the ANC came to power in 2019 with just over 10 million votes. And we've got about 38, 39 voters in the country, you know, people who are over 18 and who can vote. So you can see just a dissatisfaction among the youth and distrust in formal politics and distrust also in the ANC.
I've just got a couple of comments that have come in on our chat, which I just would love to read out. Nikki Landella says, I was 8 years old when South Africa voted in its first democratic election. I didn't understand words like apartheid and democracy, but I could feel something shifted, and today I feel something similar. And Carolina Villena says, for me, regardless of its country or where we are coming from, youth voters played the major role in every election season. They want a sense of peace and security as well as their own rights. But what you have just said is that many of these, in the past, many of the younger voters haven't even registered.
And this is in a country where the average age is 28, if I'm not wrong, William, is that correct? So it is a young nation, but they don't seem to want to decide their future. And I'm just sort of, I think the way Carolina also said, we're all trying to get a head around that. We're not being able to understand that. Yeah. Maybe you can offer us some more context.
Yes, no, the context really is, unfortunately, I mean, I am in the space, obviously building the democratic capacity of youth and older adults. But, you know, many South Africans see street protests as more powerful than their vote. And that really is our problem. So people would rather protest in the streets, and I think that has a bigger impact than their vote. That's the one. The second one is, you know, many think, well, actually their votes doesn't count. You know, they're so marginalized, so despondent, so hopeless, that if they turn up there, you know, it wouldn't matter. Although, obviously, if you look at the numbers, it matters. I mean, the ANC is only in power with over 10 million votes, and there are 38 million voters. So, I mean, it is, you know, it's also a lack of voter education, and also the country has a very high illiteracy, lack of literacy in the country. And our voter education program since 1994 sadly hasn't been that great. And that really is a problem, and we really have to lift our game in doing better voter education.
Is that deliberate, or that's just how it's happened?
That's very difficult to say. I mean, you know, so the Independent Electoral Commission really has not focused on voter education in a way it should be. But also, I mean, the way our country works, civil society, I mean, it's a very big part of civil society. We should have done so much better. And also, I mean, the Department of Home Affairs, the Government Department and the Justice Department, two departments involved in democracy. I mean, they have done very, very little. I'll explain to you the view on voting. We've got a very narrow view on voting in South Africa. So people think, many people vote for political parties as if the parties are football clubs. Like your Kaizer Chiefs or Amazulu clubs in South Africa, where you vote for the party through thick and thin. So a proper voter education would have changed that. So people would, you know, supporters of the ANC will not vote for another party. They would rather stay at home, because that's how they see voting. Right. So we don't have a tradition where people vote against their own party, or people turn up and using their vote as, you know, activism. So people see a voting protest as staying at home and not voting.
Is that why, Christine, the ANC has been able to, I don't know, get away? I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I'll use it anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the reason why because the ANC is assured that its voter may not vote for ANC, but it certainly won't vote for another party, that South Africa now has one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world? Where are we at? 45% or something?
Yeah, 45%.
There is no reason of any accountability. There is no fear.
Right, and you need to understand, I mean, so government doesn't create jobs, right? But government creates an environment where investment flows into the country. Yeah. And what we've had in South Africa over the years is private sector retreating from the country, sitting on huge capital reserves, but not investing in the country because the country is not being well run. So that is where people can then look to the ANC and say, the administration of the country, right? The decimation of state-owned enterprises, how the budget is funds are allocated, taxpayer resources, the corruption levels, all of these things, right? And we've talked about the power crises and how, even electricity supply is not reliable. So it's been an issue. You've got, a healthy banking sector, for example, mining sector, all these companies that have huge, deep capital reserves that could flow back into the country, but it's not being reinvested because the private sector is signaling we don't trust the way the country is being run. So that is why you have unemployment sitting at the way it is. And so you talk about, to your point, Birish, to say specifically that the ANC sort of guaranteed a number of votes. You have about 20 million South Africans on welfare, right? These are people getting a monthly check from the government. Right. Look, it's small change. It doesn't take people very far. But this association that people make, and William sort of alluded to that, is this is coming from the ANC, right? And the understanding for grant recipients, right, the social welfare people on this program is that if we vote the ANC out, we're no longer going to get this. So the ANC is almost guaranteed, a lot of these votes. And when you go to these people and you say, well, there are alternatives, have you considered other parties? The first question is, will they give me a grant? Right. What will they give me in return? The ANC gives me this monthly check. What are these other parties going to give me?
It's a fascinating point you make. And if I can just come to you on that, William, I mean, just based on what Christine said, it sounds to me like there is incentive for the ANC to try and invest political capital, if not economic capital, in ensuring that these grants continue and that the actual problems of load shedding, unemployment, maybe are left on the back burner as long as they stay in power on the strength of these grants? Or am I being too extreme in this interpretation?
No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. But I mean, I wanted to come back to an earlier question that you asked me: why is this election so exciting, and why is it so different from before? I mean, I was around the 1994 election, and that was the end of apartheid election, and I was at a time a violence negotiator, looking at conflicts, but almost the same kind of, not a similar, but close to the same kind of optimism in 1994. I think we can see it here, because what has happened in the country is for the first time that we've got a sizable number of young people who were born after 1994 are going to vote. For the first time. So they didn't experience the ANC as a glorious liberation movement and so on. They've seen the ANC as a failed party. And so on. So they now going to vote. And also we've seen for the first time maybe better quality political parties. I mean, if I go back to the last election, really we had village idiots setting up parties. The quality of the opposition was just absolutely terrible. We've got a couple of younger parties. They may not do super in this elections, but the next elections they are really going to be. I think they will come of age. But I mean, the quality has improved. I mean, I was the independent chair of the negotiations to put together 11 of the more established political parties, the multi-party charter. I put that together, which includes the Democratic Alliance as the biggest party. So more of the opposition parties are already established, to try to make it a little bit more attractive to voters. And also to young voters, to say, well, you may not agree with one of the parties, but if you put it all together, there's something for you. So I think there is a sense of expectation right now in the country. There really is a sense of expectation.
And can I just pick up on something that Africa is King has said in the chat, which is our parents and grandparents are still voting for the spirit of Nelson Mandela, and that is holding us younger people back because we want change and our parents are still stuck in 1994. Do you think then that this is actually the election of change?
Absolutely. I think this is actually the first election, almost a referendum on the ANC. One can think about 1994 as a referendum on the National Party and a referendum on apartheid. This is a referendum on the ANC. So it is a for or against vote in the ANC. And I think that is where we are now. And that is what makes this such a critical election. And it's also a critical election in the context that if, it's sort of a minute before midnight, if one want to call it that. If we don't make the change, if there's not a change right now, it will be very difficult in 5 years to make that turnaround. And I think there's a sense almost across society, whether you're in business or whether you're a young person, unemployed, that this is the moment. If there's no change now, the country really is going to be very, very much in crisis, deeper crisis.
And can I just put one other question to you from SE? With all the systemic problems and entrenched corruption, will another political party even make a change?
I mean, that really is the key question. The good thing about South Africa, there's something about a country which is different from other African countries or even some other emerging countries. So we would have been a Zimbabwe right now if we didn't have a strong business and a strong civil society, and also a non-state individuals. There's a very high civic responsibility, individual responsibility, which has been cushioning the crisis of the country, and so on. So it will make a turnaround easier if we use business and we use civil society. I'll just give you an example. I mean, because the state has failed to such an extent that most of our our social services, our social welfare services are actually run by civil society organizations now, not by the state, because the state has just been so corrupted and doesn't have the capacity. So if we use, if there's a new government and a new government use the full talent and skill set and resources of the country, because right now one of the reasons why we're here is that the ANC cycle after cycle has become a smaller ruling elite. So it's a small connected group of people run this complex, diverse country, excluding the resources of business or civil society or the professionals. And it even become, because I mean, we are the most diverse society in the world, but if you look at the ANC, it's become almost a really black organization, excluding many other South Africans that could have been very productive in turning the country around.
I'm glad we're talking about the ANC, because we did want to talk about the ANC in detail. So let's just start doing that. And you did mention the optimism of 1994. And as luck has it, William, we do have some images from 1994, that remarkable election that you were talking about, which we can, some images that we can play for our viewers. And I remember the banner at the time was "A better life for all." That is what the ANC under Nelson Mandela promised there. Is it fair to say that the ANC has failed in achieving that goal, or am I again being a bit too partisan?
You know, it is fair to say that. I mean, I don't want to give you all of the numbers, but I've just used the Zuma presidency. It's just under 9 years of his presidency. I mean, during that period, government statistics showed that South Africa, or the state, lost 3 trillion South African rands in corruption. So I'll give you the context. What does this mean? So during that period, our national budget was between 1.3 and 1.6 trillion rand. So Zuma, during his 8 odd years, actually lost at least 2 cycles of national budgets of the country gone. So you can imagine what that could have and so on. I mean, one day when Jacob Zuma fired the then finance minister Nene, because Nene at the time opposed Zuma's wanted to sign a corrupt deal with Russia to produce nuclear power stations in South Africa. It was an absolutely corrupt deal. Zuma fired Nene for his opposition. On that day, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange lost 500 billion rand. That's almost a third of South Africa's national budget lost in one day. I mean, these are the numbers.
I'm just reeling from the numbers that you're throwing at me, and I just feel that I think I need like a graphic break almost, and this is where I'd sort of request Dustin to
Dustin, help.
not Dustin, I'm sorry, Wade, because we have a graphic which shows all the presidents of South Africa who have all been ANC presidents since 1994. And that graph is interesting because, as we will see, it is during the term of Jacob Zuma, around his presidency, that the ANC vote share starts to drop. And I'm wondering if corruption had something to do with that. And this is where I'd like to bring in Christine. I mean, is it fair to say that it is the Jacob Zuma presidency that really saw the fortunes of the ANC start to turn?
Yeah, but you must also remember at that time you had this significant split in the party because Zuma's predecessor, Thabo Mbeki, was essentially kicked out of office. The ANC recalled him from the presidency and Zuma was installed. So by the time that election had happened, Thabo Mbeki's people had basically broken away from the party and they'd started a new outfit. And a lot of people who were angry about the Zuma era, you know, who were Thabo Mbeki loyalists, even in the voting population, left the ANC. So that was a significant marker. But of course, the Zuma years, as we are now seeing, because at that time it wasn't visible, but now that, you know, you've had commissions of inquiry and South Africans have been told the numbers that William was telling you now, people really get to understand the scale of what was happening. So much so that the current president, Ramaphosa, said, we've had 9 wasted years. Yeah. It was a very controversial statement, but he was essentially saying the last 9 years have been wasted. And this was somebody from the ANC making that statement about somebody who's also from the African National Congress.
Who was in the ANC? He's no longer in the ANC now,
Well,
right?
he's still an ANC card-carrying member, and this is where it gets interesting. He's still an ANC member. He's formally still an ANC member, and they're having difficulty in dealing with the former president, Jacob Zuma, because of the sensitivities around that, the support, the strong support that he still holds in one of the most important provinces in the country, KwaZulu-Natal.
Before you give the surprise away, we do intend to talk about Jacob Zuma in some detail. William, I hope you're hearing me as well. We do intend to talk about Jacob Zuma and some other political leaders. But right now, just for the sake of being with the ANC, can you, I mean, to someone like me who's never been to South Africa but just finds this entire political discussion absolutely fascinating, how did the people react to all these allegations of corruption, particularly when it comes to Jacob Zuma? And there have been many, right? I mean, there is a new corruption trial that's going to begin next year in relation to an arms deal, and those charges are decades old. He's already spent 2 months in prison in 2021, if I'm not wrong, as part of a conviction for contempt of court, which is again somehow related to corruption. How did ordinary South Africans react to this? I mean, we are talking about we're talking about a party that promised a better life for all, and here we're talking about literally loot of public money, isn't it?
Yes, you know, our issue in the country is that many people cannot make the connection between the corruption and the unemployment and the hopelessness and them living in an informal settlement. They cannot see that. I mean, you know, we've got our biggest crisis. One of our biggest crises right now is the power issue. And again, I mean, I don't want to overemphasize the numbers and so on, but over the decade, we've lost 3 trillion rands because of power outages. And why is the power outages? It is because it's corruption and ANC appointing politically connected appointees who doesn't have the competence, and then, you know, the corruption of procurement, and it destroys and it leaves us with 3 trillion gone in the economy. But people cannot make that connection to the governance, and I think that really is the society problem. I mean, it's just that people de-emphasize the impact of corruption. Often some people will say, well, you know, corruption happened during your party. You know, also, I mean, that was sort of a favorite thing of Jacob Zuma. He built himself a house of 280 million rand with public money. And when he was confronted, he said, oh, you know, do you know that a former apartheid president, he also built a house? Obviously, the apartheid president built a house of 280 million. And at that time, the ANC actually protected Jacob Zuma. It came out, sadly, afterwards, a month ago, when Zuma had formed his own party, the current general secretary of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, admitted that at the time that the ANC had lied in Parliament about Jacob Zuma abusing state money for personal enrichment because they wanted to protect him as the president. So, the party has been protecting its corrupt members, has been stifling information from coming out. A lot of this information is now coming out. It's it's actually flooding out. But in the past, the party rallied around its corrupt leaders.
I've got lots and lots of comments that are coming in, which I must just read some of them to you. We just had Africa is King. I know I mentioned him before, but he said a better life for all was a lie. So that comment. A lot of people talking about corruption. For example, Paul Dench mentioning corruption and about this, he's not convinced that this election even is going to change anything. Then we've got Shader, Michael Schultz, who says it's not the ANC that failed, it's the small, selfish men who run the party, who ruin the ideals. And Shader says, this question, what does a less than 50% majority ANC government look like? I'm not too well versed in politics, but I'm just curious. I don't know if anybody can quickly answer that one. William, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So the outcome, let's say the ANC get under 50%, so the ANC is very likely to get between 49 and the floor of 40%. So if the ANC get between 49 and 45, it will put together a coalition government with smaller parties, which I think it prefers that kind of route. It is now in coalition in Johannesburg City with small parties like Al-Jama, the Patriotic Alliance. So it's hoping that those parties get the numbers sort of 1%, 2%, and they can then put a coalition together. But that in itself will be changed in South Africa. It would be seen as a defeat for the ANC. So even if they continue to govern in that coalition, it will be seen as change, and it will actually become much more accountable. But it will also cause actually a crisis within the ANC itself, because if the ANC drops below 50%, it's only then where the real introspection will happen within the party. And it's also very likely that a party will kick out Ramaphosa, for example, and that will open also a whole new dimension within the ANC. So it is not just that the ANC will be in a coalition government, the ANC will also have a crisis of fate and a real internal crisis, because one of its leaders will be pushed out in a similar way that Zuma was pushed out, because it will be the first time that a party drops under 50%. And then I think that will be the real introspection. But being in a coalition actually will for the first time make it accountable, because it will know that thereafter it will be gone.
We do want to talk about those coalitions, and because we're going to talk about those coalitions, we're going to have to talk about those other smaller parties. But before we do that, William, just so that everybody across the table is aware that that is what we are going to be doing, I'd just like to come to Cherry just to sort of get a check on where the comments are headed in the community chat and what people have generally been saying.
Yeah, Alex has already put a lot of comments and questions that's already in the chat, but I have to still emphasize that when it comes to the problem of corruption, many people seem very emotional and they have a lot of strong feelings about that. A lot of people also talk about how young voters have lost hope and they don't know who to vote for. And people are really enthusiastic about this topic, actually.
No, I think I'm learning a lot as I'm going along, and I'm really glad that a lot of you guys are writing in and sending us your comments. Some people we see on a regular basis, and it's good to see those comments coming in. I think it just sort of adds to the entire discussion. Let's move it forward. And let's talk about these parties that might end up in coalition. Since we were spending so much time on Jacob Zuma, let's talk about Jacob Zuma, because Jacob Zuma is backing a party called the MK. Don't ask me to expand on what the MK stands for. Christine can do that.
I spent so much time with him yesterday. uMkhonto is Sizwe.
Right.
And the literal translation
when you
is
say
spear
him,
of the
you
nation.
don't mean Jacob Zuma, you
With
mean
Birish.
Birish.
Trying to get him to say uMkhonto Sizwe.
Yeah,
And I think you should trust yourself.
I'm just...
There's not even a click or anything. uMkhonto Sizwe.
Yeah, I'll stick with uMkhonto, but maybe I'll just, MK is what I'm going to go with. William, we want to talk about Jacob Zuma, but for the benefit of all the guys who are tuning into this stream, let's just listen to some of the things that Jacob Zuma has said. We're going to play a soundbite of something that he said recently at, I think it's one of his election rallies, and I think Wade can play that soundbite from Jacob Zuma for us.
There are many parties out there that will be voting with us because, as the black nation that has been struggling, we are saying that it's D-Day. Those who say with their mouths that we are free, but are basically gatekeeping for the oppressors, we are going to remove them from the position they are holding.
William, does Jacob Zuma have the strength, the political strength, to actually remove the oppressors? I'm guessing he's talking about the ANC from power.
I mean, just kind of listening. It's kind of post-truth. What did I call it? Before,
I'm glad you're saying that.
Actually
I'm glad you're saying that, not me.
And so on. But I mean, he has cult status in terms of following, and there's some people who will support him on that basis. So, but his support lies in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, KwaZulu-Natal is a province. It's a very key province in the election. About 20% of the electorate are based in KwaZulu-Natal. So if the ANC, if the ANC loses KwaZulu-Natal, that brings the party below 50%.
Okay.
Just losing the province. And Jacob Zuma, so far, from a polling point of view, is sitting on between 8 and 18% in KwaZulu-Natal. That will make him a very important player, kingmaker. I don't think he will win the province, but he will be a kingmaker. So, he could decide who is going to be in the coalition, if it's going to be an ANC coalition or it's going to be the multi-party charter, because the multi-party charter is quite strong in KwaZulu-Natal. There's Inkatha Freedom Party. It used to run KwaZulu-Natal. It used to have a majority. I lost that majority a couple of years ago, and it's on a resurgence. And the Democratic Alliance actually has to really, and that's the main opposition, is perhaps very outside of Western Cape right now. They're very strong in KwaZulu-Natal. They have possibly one of the most exciting politicians in the country right now, Papas, who's a mayor of a smaller town. So there may be a coalition of the multi-party charter, which is the 11 members, opposition members, is a Democratic Alliance and a DA, and then some of the smaller parties. But they may need potentially one of the parties outside the coalition, and Zuma will play a key role.
I just want to sort of maybe throw this to Christine. Help me understand this, because I'm at a very basic level here. Yeah. We're talking about a president with so many corruption allegations against him, and new revelations, as William is saying, are coming out now as we're in this election cycle. Yet he remains popular. I don't understand that. Yeah,
so you have to understand, even the soundbite that you just played, right? It's how Zuma has pitted himself to his supporters. That, the struggle of apartheid isn't quite over yet. There are people within the ANC, quote-unquote, Cyril Ramaphosa and his people, who are essentially the gatekeepers of the oppressors. These people have no interest in really radically transforming the economy of the country, right? So he will say, I try to do the right things. I try to go in and take from white people what they took from us and give it back to black people. And this is what I got back, right? And people like Ramaphosa and company are safeguarding, right, the interests of white people within the African National Congress. So that resonates with a lot of black South Africans who look at the state of the country today, the distribution of wealth, the inequality. This is one of the most unequal societies, in fact, the most unequal, according to the World Bank. So if you're a black South African and somebody tells you, right, the ANC is safeguarding the interests of the white minority few, and anybody who's trying to stand up to them is being discarded, that resonates with people. So it's not just we love Jacob Zuma for the man he is, but just how he's presented himself to people. Hence, he says those who are gatekeeping you know, for the white people. We are going to get rid of them. And I've had to go out of the ANC, get involved with another party so that we can take down this faction. Effectively, that's what he's saying in that soundbite. And that resonates.
William, how exclusionary are the policies of the ANC? Are they exclusionary? Do they take everybody on board? Or am I, again, reading things that I shouldn't be reading?
I mean, probably ANC is, you know, the enrichment for very, very few. So the country has all of the, I mean, we've got a constitution, and our constitution is very redistributive. I mean, our constitution is very clear on social justice. We also have a set of policies that are very clear, empowerment policies, affirmative action, and so on. The problem has been that the ANC has actually corrupted all of these policies to benefit only a small elite, and that really is our problem. And they've excluded many others, and the ones that the ANC included has been on social welfare grants. So you know, 21 million people on social welfare grants, a very small social welfare grants. That is their empowerment that the ANC has been giving to them, and I think, and so inequality has worsened. And because the economy has worsened, the inequality is also worsened, and the joblessness is worsened. I mean, we're sitting with a joblessness now of 42%, and that jumped from when Jacob Zuma started his presidency, unemployment was 18-19%. So it is moved from, and when he left, unemployment was sort of in the mid-30s%. So you see just erosion of value. And because the government has so corruptly and incompetently ran the economy, businesses have left. I mean, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is now half its worth since 1994, half of its worth. I mean, that translates into jobs lost and businesses lost. Right. So if you are in a rural area, you don't understand how the incompetence and corruption actually really impact on you directly.
And a few comments just to bring in here. Azalia I'm sorry about the pronunciation, Nuwenus says corruption has crippled South Africa, which I think is pretty much what you're just saying. And then on the subject of Jacob Zuma, again, apologies for the pronunciation, Zifamanda P. Notombela says, one thing you must not miss on Jacob Zuma and MK is that he wants to change the constitution. You just mentioned the constitution there, William. Is that a possibility if he were ever to get power back again?
You know, Jacob Zuma cannot go to Parliament because he had a conviction before, and the Constitutional Court emphasised that. So he is really not interested in becoming a member of Parliament again, or the president again. What he is very interested. He wants to get enough votes to do about two things. First, you know, almost a revenge. To get Ramaphosa out. He wants to go into a coalition with the ANC, and his demand that he's already set, he wants Ramaphosa to quit as president in return for giving the ANC potentially a majority. And then the second one, which most were even more important to him, he wants a presidential pardon. I mean, he is facing corruption charges of just under 100 corruption charges of corruption and racketeering. I mean, his case has been moved to August, to after the elections. So it's going to happen in August. And it is very likely going to be prosecuted. He's been trying, you know, what we call in South Africa a Stalingrad legal strategy of trying to escape it and looking for technicalities. And he can't run, he's run out of runway. And he needs a presidential pardon. And he's asked Ramaphosa before for a presidential pardon, and that was rejected. And he's hoping that if he gets the numbers, he goes back to the ANC and says, I can give you a majority to govern the country. I want a presidential pardon.
Just hearing you speak, William, I think we should have just done this news desk conversation on Jacob Zuma, but maybe lesson learned for next time. I'd like to just move this along a bit and talk about another former ANC stalwart. We're talking about Julius Malema, former ANC Youth League leader, expelled from the party in 2012 and then founded the EEF, the the EFF.
There we go.
EFF, I can't read my own handwriting. The EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. Let's just listen to what he has said recently, and then we can talk about Julius Malema and the EFF in these elections.
The emphasis on land derives from the fact that 30 years down the line, 80% of the land is in the hands of the whites. Jobs is informed by the fact that joblessness in South Africa today sit at more than 15 million people who are capable to work. And our emphasis on now is because our suffering is happening now.
So Julius Malema, they're laying down what the problem in South Africa right now is, but does the EFF have the solutions for these problems, William?
I mean, yes, let me just start. Interesting that, you know, the name Economic Freedom Fighters and then the name of Jacob Zuma's party, uMkhonto with Sizwe, SWORD, MK for SWORD. Both of these names are actually part of the ANC tradition. And when I said earlier on, there's a lot of older voters vote for the ANC based on the past, and it's very difficult for them to vote for new parties. Both Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma actually chose names that are linked to the ANC, and they've presented themselves as still part of the ANC, but outside, and it's the good people outside who's going to get a transformation in a way to capture the voters that would normally not vote for another party. So just to put that aside. And the interesting, I mean, from their clip now is that Julius Malema was the ANC Youth League president before, and he was part during the Zuma years and before that of the enrichment, you know, benefiting of their small elite that became very rich because they connected, like Jacob Zuma. And it's quite interesting. I mean, I've given you the numbers, Loss. I would say if we look back at that 10 years, where Julius Malema was involved as ANC Youth League president, Jacob Zuma as ANC and country president, we're talking here about 5 to 6 trillion rand loss through corruption. That excludes incompetence. I mean, incompetence is what our Auditor General will say, you know, fruitless expenditure and waste and those sort of stuff. They're the same kind of numbers. With that kind of numbers, if you think about it, those numbers are bigger than any of the budget of any African country, and so on. So there is no responsibility taken by these sort of spin-offs from the ANC, and they present themselves as populists and as saviors of the poor, that they were responsible actually for the erosion of value and for, you know, the crisis that we are in the country.
Let me just go to Christine, because Christine, I saw that extended program, DW News Africa, which again I recommend you guys to watch. It's there on YouTube. And I think you mentioned there somewhere that the EFF is expected to be the only party that increases its vote share in this election. Is that correct? And if that is correct, how does that happen in the light of what William has just said?
So in the big three, right? So the ANC and the biggest opposition, the Democratic Alliance or the DA.
Which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah, so these parties are, you know, projected to not grow, right? So with the ANC, we're talking about possibly getting, you know, losing the majority, and similarly so with the Democratic Alliance. And I think, you know, we will talk about the DA. But yeah, the Economic Freedom Fighters burst onto the scene, taking 10% of the vote share in the first election. Impressive for a party that, you know, put it all together in about 2-3 years. So the projections is that they will grow, depending on which poll you're looking at, maybe 2 or 3 percentage points. So we're not talking about huge growth, but, you know, it is at least making ground with capturing young people, right? This message of we need to do something radical is really resonating with young people. And as such, this is why there is the sense that the EFF will probably grow in this election.
And talking of the EFF and Julius Malema, in the chat there's quite a split between those who think he's fantastic and those who really don't.
Yeah.
We have two questions which are sort of similar. Majdi Awad says, why is there not more support for Julius Malema? And Simba Kepad says, do you think the EFF will make it?
So there are a number of challenges presented, and depending on who you're talking to, the issues are different. So I'll start with one of the things that voters do not like about the economic freedom fighters. So South Africa's having this, issue with illegal foreign nationals in the country, many of them coming in from Zimbabwe and other African countries, because this is at least a part of the continent where the economy is better off than other places. So a lot of South Africans are angry at the presence of, foreign nationals, illegal immigrants, so to say, in the country. I'm sure you've remembered reporting on, xenophobic violence in the country. So these things are a big issue. And Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters take this very sort of pan-African approach to say these borders were imposed by the colonizers. Africa should be open to everybody, and we are not interested in fortifying our borders and chasing fellow Black Africans out when we were colonized by Europeans and etc. So this doesn't go down well with Black South Africans who want to see the government take a stronger stance and basically not just allow people to pour into the countries. Then from a business perspective, industry's made it clear that if you have the economic freedom fighters come in, who push, for example, nationalization of key sectors of the economy, etc., taking over banking and other strategic sectors of the economy, that doesn't bode well for the private sector. So much so you even have the main opposition saying, we will even get into bed with the ANC in the way of coalition to prevent a scenario where the EFF gets anywhere near government. So depending on who you're talking to, these are the issues.
And, sorry, just quickly, Teeman, echoing your comments, said the only thing stopping Julius from being president is that he wants to open borders, which is what you just said about making it pan-African.
I'd just like to sort of move this along. I know, William, maybe you want to say a few words about Julius Malema, but if I can just request you to maybe hold fire, and then, because I can move the thing along and talk about the biggest opposition party that Christine was talking about, the Democratic Alliance, and this is led by John... I hope I get this right. Steenhuisen? Steenhuisen. Led by John Steenhuisen. He's also there in the fray. Let's listen to what he has had to say in recent election rallies, and then we can discuss the Democratic Alliance.
On Wednesday, the ANC will lose the outright majority that it has abused for decades. It will lose the majority that it's abused to push this country into unemployment, to commit corruption and misrule. And on Wednesday, we close the chapter on the ANC rule.
Right, simple, straightforward comment there from John Steenhuisen. I got that right. William, is the DA going to be able to close the chapter on ANC rule and kick the ANC out of power?
Just before I get there, just one small thing about the EFF. I mean, their problem is that MK of Jacob Zuma is actually fishing in the same pond that they are fishing, and that's going to be their new problem. So they were on the rise, and because both of these parties, EFF and MK, are part of the ANC family, they're getting those voters that normally would have voted for the ANC but is dissatisfied. So they're they're in the same pond, yeah. And that's going to be, so ironically, the MK is actually going to be pushed down the EFF rise. I mean, the EFF would have, I suspect, in this election, could have gone all the way up from the sort of 9% where they are, 10%, to about 18%. But they, they could actually, their voters could be taken over by MK. Just put that aside. The second one, just coming back to the DA. The problem with the DA, if the DA would have waltzed into this election as a winner, if it had kept, potentially some of the Black members that it had in the past, and so on. I mean, that really is possibly it's disadvantage from a leader leader point of view. But the DA is now part of the multi-party charter. So it's a bigger group of parties that includes the Inkatha Freedom Party, the New Party, Action, SA, the Freedom Front Plus, and also Sanko South African National Civic Organization that used to be part of the ANC, and they campaigning in the Eastern Cape. So I think what we may get, so we may actually have, if you look at the polls now, collectively the DA and its partners are polling now together in that sort of 39% space. The ANC is polling between 42, 45. So that's where we are. So the MPC, unless they, today, if they can get at least to the mid-40s, they'll be able to form a government with other smaller parties and so on. If they don't get it, if they get stuck in that sort of 39%, it will allow the ANC to potentially to form a government with some of the bigger parties. The ANC will be, what we've seen the last couple of days, they're looking for partners that are not the EFF or MK. So they may have a conversation, for example, either with a DA individually or either with the Inkatha Freedom Party that is also part of the MPC, or either collectively with a MPC, collectively and form some kind of government of national unity, almost like the Mandela government.
It's interesting what you talked about the DA being able to retain some of its black members, and this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, Christine, when you were trying to, I think, say that the DA doesn't have much of an appeal when it comes to black voters because they're seen as a party of the whites. Is that correct?
That's right. And I mean, somebody's just made the comment, and you might pick it up, Azalia, saying, they only appeal to taxpayers, right? So you have this scenario where they have only been tested in the one province that they've had the opportunity to govern, and that is in the Western Cape. Now, this is where Cape Town is, and many of you would probably have seen the scenic side of Cape Town, right? These, beautiful homes and these affluent suburbs. But you also have the other side of the story, and that is where you see black people living in abject poverty, and it doesn't appear that the Democratic Alliance has a plan to lift those people out of that poverty. So you have a well-run province, the infrastructure is there, it functions very well for the taxpayers, but once you're outside of those suburbs and in the marginalized townships where black people are, it isn't quite working well. So there is the sense that the DA doesn't have, black people's interests at heart, that it doesn't have a plan to, lift the black masses out of poverty. And William was alluding to the fact that they've had some sort of key figures, black figures, leading figures, right? People in John Steenhuisen's position who've left the party and said, I felt the struggle, I felt the conflict of trying to do more for black people, and yet I met the DA establishment basically stopping me from doing that.
And let me just pick up on another couple of comments. Corny Bratt, when we were just talking about whether there could possibly be a coalition between the ANC and DA, which William was just talking about, Corny Bratt says, what are the odds of a grand coalition between the ANC and DA? William, you were just talking about that is a possibility, but what are the odds?
Yeah, I mean, just on that DA, I mean, ironically about the DA, actually, it is the most diversified political party in the country because the ANC has become so narrowly black that the DA. I mean, with its numbers, although it is struggling to get over that 25% ceiling, it's actually has. I mean, its majority are black voters. That's the irony that it cannot extend from that black voter base. I mean, it has more black voters than the EFF, for example. So its irony is it cannot move that black voter base beyond double it. And that's been its struggle. So, what is in terms of from a coalition point of view? I mean, the dilemma is for the ANC if they get under 40%, if they drop to 45 and below, then they will need a bigger opposition party. The sort of smaller partners like Al Jamar in Johannesburg and the Good Party of Patricia De Lille, the former DA, Cape Town mayor. If they don't bring the numbers, the ANC will be forced to look at the EFF or MK. The problem with the EFF's demands, and they've already made their demands quite clear, is that they want to have the deputy presidency, and they want a finance ministry, and they want a nationalization of the South African Central Bank. I mean, if you just think about the chaos that will cause in the economy, and that's a really difficult one for the ANC. And then they will have Jacob Zuma, possibly. Jacob Zuma demands Ramaphosa to go immediately, and he wants a presidential pardon. I mean, again, these are really tough and humiliating conditions for the ANC, which really potentially could crash South Africa's economy. Then what is left for them? They will have to then look around the Inkatha Freedom Party that they used to be in partnership with in the late 90s in KwaZulu-Natal province. But the Inkatha Freedom Party is part of the MPC, is an ally, a partner with the DA. And the multi-party charter coalition agreement runs all the way until 2029. And all of the parties signed up not to partner with the ANC or the EFF. And so that really is a problem. So then one way out then for the ANC would be to collectively bring the MPC together and then partner with them. And I would foresee in that scenario, the best scenario would be almost a Cape Verde-like government of national unity, not the Mandela national government of national unity, or Zimbabwe also had a government of national unity between ZANU-PF and the MPC. But Cape Verde would work much more better. They had one in the early 90s where the government is split in two between the ANC and the MPC. That would be a more proper grand coalition, and so on, potentially could work for the country.
William, I know you need to leave, but just as a final question to you, what do you think is most likely going to happen? If you're talking about coalitions, will we be able to form a coalition within 2 weeks? I think it needs to be formed. A quick answer from you, and I think then we can say thanks to you after that.
By the way, so many more questions for you, William.
I know, but William does need to leave.
I know. You're a popular man.
I can stretch it all the way until 20 past. I think I could do that.
Right. Well, then.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Unfortunately, our constitutional dispensation did not foresee, I think, a coalition arrangement, because we've got, by law, we have 14 days to put together a national coalition. I was a co-chair of the government process in end of February to put together a draft legal framework of what we could do, how to do that process. Now, sadly, is the government took it up, but the government did not take it through Parliament for adoption, because in February, I think many ANC leaders assumed that the ANC will win the elections, and after the elections, they will bring the bill in. Right. Now we are sitting with a problem. The ANC, may not have a majority party without, and there's no law to deal with a coalition. So I think what will happen going forward is, coalition will have to be negotiated within that 14 days and so on. I think the ANC very likely is going to, if they get a majority, when I say majority, something, if they get sort of 40% upwards, they'll look for partners and they'll begin to negotiate. There's a lot of people on standby, myself also standby in terms of from a negotiating point of view. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be the first time in South Africa's history, rather the post-1994 history, that a national coalition will be negotiated. So this is new territory. As I say, there are no laws. The only law we have, it has to happen within 14 days. Let me just tell you just a practicality, for example. We elect our president through Parliament. So when voters go out, voters today, they don't vote for the president, they vote for parties. So our electoral system is for parties. Right. And then at the opening of Parliament, the parliamentarians vote for the president. Now, if there's no majority party this time, if the first struggle is going to be how to elect a president, because in the past the ANC had a majority, so you just get his MPs and they just vote for the president. So this is absolutely new territory for the country.
Just a couple of things. Thembalani excuse my pronunciation again, Nomaya says, just voted today. Some people were getting too comfortable and forgot that the people are the boss. And also some comments about when you were talking about possible coalitions, William. Azalia Niven says, coalitions are the best thing for South Africa because everyone is out for themselves, and going into a coalition will force political parties to care for those that fall outside of their base. But somebody else is saying, Jungle George saying, coalition in Johannesburg has been a mess, unfortunately, so they're not a fan. And can I just ask this question? Because Shader has put so many questions to you, and it says, William, do you think that the splitting of votes in these elections, regional, provincial, national, will make a big impact? Obviously, it doesn't need to be a long answer, but it would be great to answer that from Shader.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The first thing about coalitions, actually coalitions, I think, is the most appropriate model for South Africa, and coalitions work really well in countries as diverse. And I think the ANC's 30 years in power, what we learned from it is that one monopoly party cannot govern South Africa. It has to be coalition. And we've seen it, I mean, in Africa since the end of the Second World War, the most successful model of governance actually has been coalitions. Cape Verde, Mauritius, the Gambia, and so on. And it hasn't been one-party states. In fact, one-party or dominated governments has been, it's been absolutely the worst. The pit hasn't worked in a context. Now, in terms of splitting the votes, really, I think it is a good thing. I mean, because the other thing about this election, for the first time, we're having independents in this election. I mean, we've never had independent candidates. And I, again, I was a facilitator and a negotiator on behalf of independents to get them to get that dispensation, to get a good dispensation for them. So I think it's quite important. And the reason why we've seen a rise of independent candidates is because the political parties haven't been credible enough to appeal to people. And that is why we've seen the rise of the independents. So I think it's an important addition to our politics. Obviously, it's going to make it very complicated because we now have to learn, how do you behave if you get elected as an independent? You now have to engage with political parties. How are you going to do that? And it may be a baptism of fire for many of the independents.
Thanks so much for that, William. I know you have to go. Do you want to tell us who you voted for, or do you want to keep that a secret? No, that was just a rhetorical question. I don't have to answer that. You've answered enough already. We've learned a lot from you. Yeah. William, thanks so much for joining us. William Gumede, political analyst and lecturer at Wits University and founder of the non-profit Democracy Works Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us today, William. Hopefully the coalitions, if at all they are formed in time. Otherwise, we might have you on again next week talking about South African elections and coalition politics. Hopefully not. Have a lovely evening. Thanks so much for joining us today. Bye, William.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. Bye.
Thanks, William. What did you? What is your Can I get you to prognosticate about what's going to happen with that?
Because it's in the chat.
Let me just cut in with one thing. We have. I found the statistic you guys were talking about earlier about inequality in South Africa and inequality in the world. Yeah. We'll share that link in the comment section as well. I just wanted to advise a few. You need to scroll down on that website that we're sharing, and then you will see like all the Gini coefficients. Thank you. And those will tell you how inequality is in different countries. And South Africa, has the highest coefficient, so it is the most unequal in, I think it's income, wealth, and consumption.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been the case for a few years now. You know what I mean? It's topping the list every year. I think the World Bank releases this every single year. But William's actually, it's really important because of the work that he's been doing, from a democracy perspective, strengthening the institutions. One of the reasons why I'm hopeful about, the South African case, he talked about Zimbabwe and how South Africans have this fear of becoming the next Zimbabwe. Part of the reason of the collapse there is that there are just no institutions. South Africa has a really progressive constitution, right? The way an election is run, you're not going to hear much from parties about the election being unfair, not getting access to the public broadcasting space. So, monitors are allowed to come in and observe from everywhere, right? And there is never issues necessarily, right? And that's one of the things that makes this such a hopeful case. And if only South African voters could understand the power that there's in their hands. You know, William talked about the political illiteracy, right? That people just don't know how powerful their vote is. And unfortunately, it has worked out in a sense that when people protest, burn things in the street, that is when government responds. You know, when people say we have no running water and torch police stations and government fits, then there's a response. I am looking to see, you know, somebody talked about coalitions have been a mess in Johannesburg, right? Yeah. We're going to need the sort of political education about, you know, how we work in coalition politics, because the problem in a place like Johannesburg and why it's falling apart is because of the interests of the political parties, right? They want to sell this as this was our victory, it's our mayor, we did this. And as a result, you know, it all falls apart because who's leading this particular agenda. So if that happens at a national level, you could really have the frustration of government because parties are fighting over who gets the glory, who gets this ministry and all. I mean, which would happen anywhere, but in a place where everybody's trying to prove themselves, make the case for themselves.
And Michael Shine has just said, which political party actually offers real solutions for the ordinary South African? Sadly, none. So I guess, you know, working together is what...
Maybe coalitions are the answer. You know, stay with us, Christine, because I think it's time to hear what what you guys have been saying when it comes to the poll question that we had earlier. Cherry was having a look at that.
Yeah, before I talk about the poll results, I have to say the chat is super lively and everyone seems so knowledgeable and like they are so engaged in this conversation, and it's really fun to like be in the chat. So, the poll question. Is the ANC's political dominance over in South Africa? We had 648 votes, 66% thinks yes, and 33% thinks no.
Are you surprised by that, Christine?
Absolutely not. And remember, it's also, we have to understand the kinds of people that will be weighing in the chat. These are, you know, people who are likely active, who probably, you know, did go out and vote today, who have been listening into the conversation. But there is this, you know, big portion of the country that are completely marginalized. So the voices that we are likely to hear from this part of the world, these are people who are engaged, who really want that to happen. You know, there's a slogan going around, 2024 is our 1994, right? People think it's time. Things have got to change. And whether or not a single party can deliver that change, that's another story. But people realize the status quo isn't working. And so there is that conviction among many, many people. The thing is, the opposition parties have not been strong in saying to people much else other than we're not the ANC, right? And you really need to be able to position yourself, and voters need to trust you. And I'm not sensing that there's a whole lot of confidence in the opposition right now. And that's really the big challenge.
We'll leave that there for that for the moment. Christine, thanks so much for coming in. Thanks to everybody else across the community for talking to us, and also thanks Dustin, thanks Cherry for talking to you guys on the chat. I think we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, and I mean, as Cherry did just say, that there are lots of people that we haven't name-checked, so apologies for that. Nikki Landella, I know you asked lots of questions, but hopefully some of them were answered anyway by both Christine and William. So thank you so much for that absolutely fascinating conversation, and I feel like I've learned so much as well.
As have I, including how to pronounce certain South African names. I'm not going to go and try and pronounce the MK and what the MK stands. I'm not going to be able to do that. But Steenhuisen, I can do that.
The one thing I was waiting for all show.
And they need to.
And just quickly, just to say that we'll be back here again next week. We don't know what the topic is, but you can look on our community post about 24 hours before, where we will give you an idea of what we are talking about. So do join us then.
See you guys next week. Hopefully we're not talking about South Africa and they have a government by then, but you never know. Thanks for joining us today. Bye.